The story begins with the girl asking if her sister was alright. Kinger says she was fine but mentions they needed to escape from that place. However, the woman with purple hair warns they wouldn't be able to flee after offending their empress, suggesting they surrender for having made a mistake. Frustrated, Yahello stands up asking why it was a mistake since they had taken part in the ᴅɪ괱ᴄᴘ sect ceremony, where they saw her worshipping a person using the heaven and earth worship ritual, mentioning they had only asked a question out of curiosity, but this made them hunted. Moreover, the girl's sect treated human lives as if they were worthless, where it was clearly a demonic sect. Then the woman with purple hair speaks, saying she should know whom they were talking about. The Empress's master and the legendary supreme demon, where he was not only the Empress's master but also the supreme demon of the south, asking if she dared to say that the supreme demon would be swallowed by heaven and earth, advancing upon them, mentioning that in their next life they should mind their own business with their mouths shut. At that very moment, lightning strikes in the middle of the confrontation. Kinger questions what was happening and if that was an earth dragon. Around that mountain, a storm was occurring. At its peak, an unknown figure appears among the clouds. A man with golden eyes appears, and his name is Yi-Shen, former leader of the ᴅɪ괱ᴄᴘ sect. The boy thinks the realm was still the same even after 100 years of seclusion. But it seemed that his body was sanctified, questioning if he could be considered immortal, saying that this could be considered a successful breakthrough. People are surprised by the appearance of that man. Then he makes a maneuver with his hands, striking them away. The girl with purple hair thinks there was an expert protecting them, mentioning they should report to the sect master. Then the girl's group flees, and the protagonist thinks that the power of his body was not bad at all. Looking around, he ends up noticing two women, wondering if there was someone on the mountain that he had just knocked down. Worried, he questions if he hadn't hurt anyone, approaching them, suggesting to check. Landing on the ground, he asks if they were alright. Because of his descent, a gust of wind goes towards them, destroying a piece of the mountain. Sometime later, Yahello tells the protagonist what had happened, saying that the ᴅɪ괱ᴄᴘ sect was a name that sounded quite pleasant besides the title of Empress, which is quite dominating. However, one could not kill someone just because they said something wrong, and if his disciple Ŋᴂ were there, she wouldn't let that happen. Yahello mentions that he was undoubtedly an expert, and that his disciple must be a person of noble character. Then the boy says that if they were alright, he didn't need to stay there anymore, and he would withdraw because he had something to do. Yahello affirms that he was really an expert because he disappeared in an instant, questioning if they would be so powerful in the future. However, the girl is confused, seeing that her sister was desperate. Kinger remembers the name of the protagonist's disciple, mentioning that the empress who was hunting them was also called န့ᴂ. Going back to the past, one of the young man's disciples asks if he was really going to abandon them to enter a state of seclusion. But the protagonist tells the little girl not to worry because he had already killed all the rebels, and in the next 100 years, no one would offend their sect. However, with tears in her eyes, she says she didn't accept that because she didn't want him to go away. But Shen tells her to stop it because he had exhausted all his energies just so they could live peacefully in the future, mentioning that he wouldn't protect them forever, giving an order that from that day on all disciples should focus on improving their skills to restore the ancient glory of their sect. Returning to the present, the protagonist says that in just 100 years, the spiritual vein of the sect was revived, saying he would descend to take a closer look, mentioning that everything there was prosperous, so it was worth letting his disciples gain experience. Looking to the side, he notices some wooden dolls, thinking that in the past they only sold things like talismans and pills, supposing that life was getting better. Seeing the statue, the boy wonders why that statue was so familiar, asking the seller which deity it represented. But the merchant becomes desperate, asking for his mercy, saying that if the protagonist looked up, he would see a better statue. Observing the giant statue in front of him, Shen wonders why that sculpture looked so much like him. Seeing from the statue, he notices a writing of the signature from the ᴅɪ괱ᴄᴘ sect, remembering that the woman he had saved before had claimed she had been pursued by this sect. Then a man appears, saying that he was the guy who had dressed as the statue of the deity and went out robbing stores, spreading false rumors. A group of girls appears, saying that he disobeyed the law in broad daylight and should be executed. The protagonist is confused, questioning why wearing his own clothes could be considered against the law, mentioning that he wanted to ask some questions, asking why there was a statue of him there. However, people start attacking him, launching a chain attack on the protagonist and restraining him. Then at the same instant, the boy breaks those chains, saying for them to let him finish speaking, leaving the girl surprised because the ability Her Majesty granted her was destroyed in an instant, remembering that she was the only one who could break that formation. Then she looks at another girl, agreeing with each other, starting to supposedly undress, leaving the protagonist embarrassed, saying that seducing him would be useless. Then they start changing clothes, bowing before the protagonist, welcoming him, mentioning that he must be the venerable Yi-Shen and that he should follow them to the tower because the empress was waiting for him. Shen is reluctant, asking who was waiting for him. However, the girl tells him not to worry because when he got there, he would understand everything. Sometime later in the tower hall, an unknown figure asks if it was the protagonist who broke the golden lock formation. The boy confirms, saying he was the leader of the ᴅɪ괱ᴄᴘ sect and his name was Yi-Shen. Then at the same instant, a girl jumps into his arms, saying that after 100 years she could finally see him, Remembering her face, the protagonist recognizes her as that little girl who only knew how to cry, asking the girl to get off him. But the Empress says it wouldn't be possible. It was very painful for her to wait for his return. So this time, no matter what the protagonist said, Luwon wouldn't let him go away. Shen asks what she was talking about, asking Yenner to get off. But the girl questions if the protagonist would continue to be so ignorant. But it was alright because the more he behaved that way, the more she would like it. Observing the girl, Shen thinks that was the 9 turns portal, and before entering seclusion, it was the last movement the protagonist taught her. Yenner mentions that after all these years she mastered all the spells he taught her, saying she was following his teachings just for the day they met. Then using a skill, Yenner ties Shen's neck, saying that from that day they would stay together until death. Then at the same moment the girl pulls out a dagger, asking Shen to make a promise to her, mentioning that even though he was strong, his body was not indestructible. And if she cut off his legs, the protagonist would not go anywhere, launching an attack on him, saying it would hurt only for a second and after that they would be happy. However, the attack has no effect. Yenner asks why it did not cut since it was a dagger made of meteorite. Shen says that her attitude of never giving up on her goals was really her style, and his disciple was very diligent, so she should make progress like her master, launching a flame attack on the girl, mentioning that he was a master even after 100 years and Yenner would always be in his heart. At the same instant, Shen is surprised seeing the girl, who was half naked, asking if the protagonist really thought that way. Then blood starts coming out of his nose, informing that the destructive style was very powerful. Answering her question, Shen says he had not changed, suggesting she go change clothes. But Yenner says he was lying, emphasizing that he had spoken for the sake of speaking, because the boy had said nothing about the promise they had made together and had forgotten everything, leaving the protagonist thoughtful about what he had said and remembering his past with her. In his memories, Yenner says that Shen had said that those formations would not break, but still got hurt, hugging the boy, saying she would not be able to marry anymore. But the protagonist says that Yenner had defeated a black bear even being so young, and affirming that she was very beautiful and would stay with her forever, leaving the little girl embarrassed with what he had said, asking if that was true. Shen affirms, questioning if he had ever lied to her and that they would stay together forever. Returning to the present, the protagonist hugs his disciple, saying that nothing had changed and he had just arrived a little late. With tears on her face, Yenner looks at the protagonist and hugs the boy, asking why it took him so long to arrive. Sometime later, Yenner tells everything she had done over the years to Shen, mentioning that she had changed the name of the sect just to avoid being persecuted. Reluctant, the girl observes the protagonist, asking if the promise they made before was still standing. Remembering the promise he had made that he would be with everyone from the sect forever, Shen tells her not to worry because he would not break his promise, leaving Yenner embarrassed because she had really agreed, so it could be considered a marriage promise. The protagonist mentions that since they had fulfilled their promise, they had something important to do. The girl confirms, saying she would choose a favorable day, thinking it would be a wedding, but that was not what Shen wanted, but rather to reunite with everyone from the sect. Then at the same instant, one of the maids arrives to pass the report, saying that the celestial book had awakened, and all the sects joined forces to go to the city of Changshu. Shen is thoughtful about the name of that sect, thinking that before going into seclusion he forgot to take that book. Then Yenner says that the book belonged to them, giving an order to get it. But at the same instant, the protagonist asks to wait, saying he would get the book on his own. Sometime later in the city of Changshu, a boy was distributing newspapers, claiming that the battle for the celestial book had begun. Approaching the protagonist, the young man asks if he would like a newspaper. However, the protagonist did not need it. Looking around, he thinks that 100 years ago that place used to be a forest city, but it changed a lot, so he could not find the right way. But a paper doll that Yenner made for him says that with her in command, the protagonist would have no problem navigating the continent. Shen mentions that she had said that an escort would deliver him, but he was there just to get what was his, so he should not need it. Then Yenner responds, saying that when he was in seclusion, the celestial book was stored in that city, causing many disputes between families as the ᴅɪ괱ᴄᴘɪ sect was weak and unable to recover it. Yenner took advantage and told everything about the celestial book to the world, causing a fight among the cultivators. Shen understands, affirming that that plan was well planned, leaving the girl happy, saying she had reached her destination and her escort was in front of her. The protagonist asks if she had anything else to say, and the girl explains that he did not need to worry because that escort was a secret agent. With a threatening look, Yenner tells Shen to get the book and return immediately, and also should not look at other girls, because every time she thought about it, she could not help but get angry. Shen murmurs about Yenner thinking too much about things. At the same instant, the protagonist sees something. Observing a girl in front of him, he questions if that person would be his escort. Approaching her, the protagonist asks if he could know her name. Standing up, the girl says her name was Yanton and she was not very talented but had knowledge in the art of seduction, and if he had a question she would answer. And besides that, she could help find lost items. Shen thinks she must be talking about the celestial books, so that girl must be his escort, but still should confirm, whispering something in her ear, leaving the woman surprised, asking if the protagonist was 250 years old, telling Shen to get out of there and not interfere in her business. Shen says that if they were not a family, they would not live under the same roof, so she should not worry, leaving the girl furious, asking who was part of her family and if she was calling her an idiot. At the same instant, Shen holds her shoulder, saying he was looking for a lost book called Celestial Book. She is surprised by the protagonist's hand, thinking that sensation was incredible, and when she was touched, her inner elixir was about to come out. Remembering about the only person who could do that to her and questioning if the protagonist was her destined dual cultivator. Observing the girl, Shen asks if she was alright, but she was and says she had waited for the protagonist for a long time and would take him to his lost item. Thinking she could not let Shen go away, she tells him to follow her. At the same instant, an old lady was looking around, questioning where was the person she would accompany to the palace. Sometime later at the Qianshu conference, the protagonist asks why there were so many people in that place, but the girl says that was normal, asking him to look on stage and see if what he was looking for was there, mentioning that the protagonist had a lot of power and should be there for the Celestial Book because there was a rumor where the person who got it would get the continent, and if the protagonist wanted, she could help him but needed help with something. But Shen had already disappeared from her sight. Looking above, people say something had flown onto the stage. Yan asks what he was doing, because there were two people who were fighting where he could not offend in any way. While one of the people tried to attack the boy, Shen thinks he needed to find the book and leave that place as soon as possible. The man asks if he wanted to take advantage of the fight and steal his treasure, saying he would kill him, launching an attack on the protagonist and sinking his body into the concrete. The man smiles, saying no one would bother him anymore, telling them to resume the discussion about the Celestial Book. But as he spoke, the other man tells him to look behind. However, it was too late, as Shen was already right behind him preparing a punch. But he stops the punch, hearing just a light tap on the man's forehead, throwing the man far away. Shen thanks him for his guidance. For now, the Celestial Book would be his. The fight spectators are surprised because the protagonist gave just a flick on the man's forehead and yet he was beaten up. The man, saying that Shen deserved to win the Celestial Book, calls the other guy, asking how long he would stand there and telling him not to forget what he wanted. However, the guy smiles, saying he was admitting that his skills were not good enough, and for that reason, all of his loved ones were killed. The man becomes furious with what the guy had said, preparing an attack. Looking at the sky, the spectators are confused, wondering if it was going to rain, but they still wanted to see the Celestial Book. Going towards the old man, he asks if the guy had gone crazy, using a protection magic to defend himself, thinking it was already too late. At the same instant, spheres of light begin to appear around the spectators. However, those spheres were not friendly, for they began to explode. Yanton, fleeing from the spheres, thinks that the old man really used the dark pearls and caused thunders. Moreover, after just half an hour, a gigantic area will be hit and can be completely burned, affirming that the protagonist was doomed. The boy was calm in the middle of the fight, saying that thunders were a bit troublesome. Pushing the lightning aside as if it were nothing, Shen asked the old man if it wasn't true, leaving the man surprised because that was a type of thunder that was enough to peel off the skin with just a touch, but that idiot just pushed it away as if it were nothing. Shen is apprehensive because it burned his clothes, saying that all that was not a big problem for him. Observing that catastrophe in the sky, the protagonist says it was time to eradicate the source, supposing it was a great opportunity to test his physical body. But at the same instant, something goes towards his face. That was Yanton, who was hugging the protagonist, telling him not to die, asking if the boy was alright and why he was trying to play the hero. However, the lightning bolt was heading towards the two, and Shen asks what kind of rescue that was, pulling something from her bosom. She thinks they had no time. If she lost that opportunity, she might not have a chance of success. Throwing that paper on the protagonist's head, Yanton asks him not to move because that teleportation talisman could be used only once. And no matter how valuable that book was, it was not worth his life. But when she was going to use the talisman, it burns. However, Shen does not teleport, protecting the girl. At the same instant, the lightning strikes the two. With a wicked smile, the old man says he can control the skies, so the Celestial Book would be his, saying that the protagonist was inferior to him. But someone throws a stone at the man. Shen is still standing, affirming that the Ting Chao sect was really powerful because summoning a thunder was not for just anyone. But was that what he wanted? Asking if he could hear the cries within the thunder. He was treating people's lives as if they were nothing just for a book, questioning if all that was worth it. However, the old man was not up for conversation, preparing another attack on the boy and saying that the winner is the king and the loser is the villain. At the same instant, Shen punches the man's face, saying he had a tip for him. For the Celestial Book, all this time was his property. Using magic on the book, Shen says he had not seen his old friend for a long time, asking for help from the creature. Then the protagonist uses magic to heal the wounds of the people who keep asking who that man was. Then the boy approaches Yanton. Observing her, Shen questions why she did not wake up, thinking if her heartbeat had stopped. Shen is reluctant to touch the girl's bosom, thinking it was too big, but now is not the time to think about that, but to save people. Remembering that the heart was on the left side, Shen presses her bosom and realizes there really were no beats, but the unconscious girl thinks her heart was on the right side. Holding Yanton in his arms, the boy says he should find a secluded place to take a closer look. The girl is embarrassed, thinking they could cultivate meanwhile, so it would be a win-win situation. The other old man, seeing the protagonist, Lee calls him, thinking he would never have thought that a young man like that would end up with the book. At the same instant, one of the servants calls the man. The guy says it was for him to attend to the Empress's people, questioning why he appeared now. However, the servant whispers something in his ear. The man approaches the protagonist, whispering a code to him, saying he was the wrong person, but the guy says he would keep his mouth shut and respected his name all his life, saying his name was Zishing, son of Kong. Shen is surprised when the man mentions his father's name, and at the same instant Yan wakes up, sometime later in a mansion. The old man asks the little girl how was the condition of the injured person. However, she says the doctors had already tried everything, but she did not wake up. Then the old man mentions that he had heard that that woman was the companion of the owner of the celestial book, and the girl says he was correct because she was injured because she was protecting him, asking him to take a look at her. However, Yan was no longer there. Hidden, the girl thought that if she pretended to be unconscious, they would take care of her, but he simply turned around and left, wondering if he was planning something behind her back. While Yevon walks, she notices one of her talismans, affirming that no matter how much she fled, as long as she had placed one of her talismans, the boy would not escape from her. Observing the door, the girl tries to hear what they were talking about, questioning why they were silent. Then, to solve her problem, she ends up piercing a piece of the door to see through the hole. But she is surprised by what she saw. Shen was simply touching the old man's chest. The protagonist, observing the mark on the man's chest, thinks he really was the son of Kong. Zishing says that was done as a mark of his father's teachings and a symbol of his family, asking if Shen believed him now. Then Shen says he still remembered when his father went to war with him, and in the blink of an eye he had grown a lot, asking what was the problem. Zishing says he was afraid of something he did not know. 40 years ago, when his father was about to die, he called him to pass the position of city lord, and besides him and his father, there was one more person in the room. An unknown figure asks Zishing if he would be the next owner of the city, mentioning that he seemed to be a person with longevity. But Zishing says he was just a son taking his father's place and acting as lord. The person affirms that he was very obedient, and for that reason Kong liked him so much, and besides taking care of the celestial book, she wanted the man to pass on a message. When the celestial book finds its master, inform him to bring the book to ᴅɪ귱ᴄᴘɪʟᴇ�. Back in the present, Zishing says that he should keep this a secret from Yaner. The protagonist feels awkward, asking if that was the person he was thinking of. But Zishing confirms that she was his third disciple and her name was Lua, and saying she had long occupied the southern part of the continent and is considered a sovereign of the world. Shin is surprised as his disciples were outdoing each other, pondering about the name of the cave, questioning if that wasn't the mountain where he made elixirs with his third disciple. At that instant, Zishing kneels before him. Then the protagonist asks what he was doing. Zishing mentions that originally the position of city lord was not to be passed to him yet because his father wished to personally receive the owner of the celestial book. With tears in his face, he says he shouldn't bother him with those matters, but he needed his help. But Shen says his father, and he had a lifelong friendship, so he couldn't ignore it, asking where his father was. The man says his father was in a deep sleep in the Kunlun Mountains, asking the protagonist to find his disciple first. Yet, seeing that situation goes crazy, saying the protagonist was a pervert and completely misunderstood, because it was a lie that Zishing needed to speak with him in secret, and it was just an excuse to do things. Furious, she says she waited a long time for that opportunity, asking if he was playing with the girl. Entering the room, she throws a pill at them. With the protagonist fallen on the floor, Yan mentions that no matter how powerful, if they smelled a bit of her pill, they would sleep. With a mischievous look, the girl says a high-quality man like that should be hers. However, she notices a glowing scroll by her side, where she starts to hallucinate. Apparently excited, Yan asks if something like that existed in the celestial book. Seeing something shining, she asks what color that was, questioning what was happening. Sometime later, the girl was in front of the protagonist, and instantly sits on top of Shen, starting to undress. Shen, still unconscious, asks if that was the smell of alcoholic elixir, noticing something slippery and soft. Opening his eyes, the protagonist is surprised, seeing the girl on top of him, asking what she was doing. Embarrassed, Shen tries to get up, telling Yanton not to come closer. The boy, recalling his memories before fainting, remembers that Yen invaded the room, saying random things and affirming that nothing unusual had happened at that moment. Yevon, hugging the protagonist, is questioned about what she was doing. Then she kisses the boy's neck, and also keeps sniffing the protagonist, leaving Shen extremely embarrassed, asking Yen to stop. However, the girl grabs his hand, and then starts to lick his finger. Shen ponders if the cause of that could be what he thought. Observing the celestial book, he realizes it was open, then tells the girl to behave. Then she starts to act like a dog, and the protagonist thinks that was the worst possible scenario. Because Shen had stored countless treasures in the celestial book, and to not be discovered, he put a spell where all people would receive a brainwash if they looked at it. They would become dogs, and then Shen questions if she had looked at the book, murmuring that he couldn't just sit and do nothing. With a sigh, he said that was very troublesome. Slapping the girl's face, Shen mentions that Yen was lucky because it was the protagonist who found her. The prohibition "do not indulge" takes a dog's soul and fuses it with humans. And if he tried to use common magic to break that spell, it would just turn her into an idiot. Then Shen presses Yanton to the ground, carrying out the dog's soul, saying she could return to normal. Then the girl faints and the protagonist thinks it was a success. Since she had suffered a lot, she should allow the celestial book to bless her with good dreams, mentioning that after Yanton woke up, the curse would be completely broken, and because he had helped her, the girl should keep that a secret. Then Shen says he should visit the Fusion Cave, besides that he should take advantage of the two being asleep and quickly leave that place, as it would avoid a problem of having to explain. As he was leaving, Yanton holds the boy's clothes. Shen asks if she was still awake. Looking at the girl, she says she would definitely protect him. And with tears in her face, Yanton says she didn't want to be alone. Sighing, the protagonist decides to stay in that place, saying he would wait for her to wake up and then leave. However, the one who wakes up first is Zishan, questioning how he had fallen asleep and where Shen was. Sometime later, when the protagonist's disciples asks her servant why Shen had not returned yet, but the girl says that when she got there, the protagonist had already left the city. The other woman says that was absurd because she was the oldest disciple, so Shen couldn't leave without saying goodbye. But the girl mentions that she had heard about a woman who saved his life and ended up in a coma. The protagonist's disciple says she was saying that just so she wouldn't die. However, the servant says that Shen was looking for the medicine to save her life, where he ended up taking her with him. The Empress smiles because the protagonist was still the same because he still liked weak girls. Then she starts to change clothes, mentioning that she would personally give the order to invite Shen back to the city. One of her servants says she couldn't do that. However, she falls silent when she sees the Empress's look, asking if she was trying to tell her what to do. At the same instant, the servant kneels, asking for forgiveness from the Empress. Thinking about the current situation, she sighs, saying that the elder of the Blood River had become a strong person in the realm of life and death and began to recruit troops in the north, so she couldn't leave the city. Then one of the Empress's generals appears, saying they were at her orders. The Empress gives the order for her to bring the protagonist in her place and also wished that she spread a message. Chun tells her not to worry because the Kangyuan continent was just a place. Back to the protagonist, Yanton had already woken up, asking where she was, and Shen questions how she could be so annoying. To get rid of her, he used the hiding ability of the celestial book, but didn't know why she had still appeared. The girl says that Smell was still in that place, and the protagonist wonders if the girl was still being a dog. Pulling something from her bosom, she says she couldn't do anything about it. And although the talisman was valuable, if it was used on the protagonist, it wouldn't be a waste because she would find him. Then Shen wonders if she still hadn't given up destroying the girl's talisman. Then Yanton notices the boy. The protagonist thinks she could no longer find him, because no matter the reason, he definitely couldn't take her to the Fudy Cave. However, Yanton whispers, asking if the boy hated her, apologizing because she had passed in the arena during the Chanshu conference, where she caused him many problems. But the desire to save him, even with the chance of dying, was real. The protagonist watches the girl talking, becoming reluctant to say anything, saying that her time was limited. But she had a wish to fulfill before dying, mentioning that she had tried many times and now was convinced that Shen was the only one who could help her, saying that he could laugh as much as he wanted because she would work for nothing. However, before agreeing to help her, she asked the boy not to give up, because she wanted the protagonist to treat her like a dog and she was willing to do anything to accept it. Then Shen sighs and deactivates his invisibility, making Yanton happy because he really showed up, thanking him, saying she wouldn't cause any more trouble, questioning if the protagonist liked dogs, and there was no reason to use the celestial book because he could pretend. However, the boy doesn't say a word since he deactivated the book. Yanton thinks that was good because he was willing to help. At that moment, the girl is stabbed in the chest. As she falls to the ground, Yanton has no idea what happened, questioning why it happened that way. However, Shen also didn't know what happened. She was talking, and at the same moment she fainted. But at this moment, the protagonist notices something. Looking around, Shen realizes there was something in that place. At that moment, the Empress appears before the boy. Shen asks if that was Yanner, and the girl questions why he didn't keep his promise and if he would go back on his word. The boy is reluctant, saying it wasn't that. Then the Empress says he could have at least sent a letter to her asking if it wasn't worth thinking about. However, the protagonist says it really wasn't worth it, striking the Empress. Seeing the girl, Shen says she wasn't Yanner. Then at the same moment, the Empress reduces to a soul. The boy mentions that it was expected because it was just a timer, explaining that timers were spirits that fed on cultivators' emotions using illusions to enter their minds, maintaining the illusion until their target was completely drained. Shen supposes that Yanton fainted because of that. But the night was the best opportunity for spirits to manipulate their illusions, questioning why they were appearing during the day. Observing the girl, the protagonist sees the spirits trying to possess her. However, Shet makes a hand sign that ends up dissipating the spirits. But something was wrong because she was still fainted, making him wonder if the girl was lost to be completely eroded. Then in Yenen's past, a girl was singing, asking if her sister wanted a crystallized hawk. However, when she looks back, there was only a pile of corpses. Yanton says it's no use because she has always been alone, thinking that everyone in the world wanted her dead, being hunted countless times and escaping, questioning how long it would last. Then a woman calls the little girl, calling her disciple. Yan wonders if she still left one person alive, questioning what she was saying. Standing up, the woman asks her not to move because she would tell her the details, saying that she was the great seer of the ᴅɪ괱ᴄᴘ sect, and some time ago they sent her a message to travel 100 miles west to find her destined disciple. Sarcastically, the girl asks if she could call her master, and if she was willing to give anything. She wanted her life, stabbing the woman, saying she had met many people like that, wanting to use the term disciple to drag her to an elixir shop. As soon as the cultivators found out they could refine through the girl, the etiquette, justice, or laws of the heavens were gone. Back to the present, Yen asks why they couldn't just leave her alone. But at the same moment, she starts to get weak because she had exhausted her cultivation, questioning if her life was coming to an end. Yanten had no family or friends, so her life would just end, saying she killed countless evildoers in her life because she had no choice, begging the heavens to have a normal life. However, a voice behind the girl asks why she would wait until the next life. Looking to the side, Yan realizes that woman was still alive, saying she could do that in this life, and all the master should do is transfer her energy to save Yanten. Then the girl starts to cry, asking if she could really continue living. Then the woman confirms, saying she could have a good life from now on. But sometime later, her master was dead. Yanten tells her not to be afraid because it was her turn to save her. All she needed to do was find a person with a sacred body and perform dual cultivation. Back to the present, Shen says the spirit was eating the girl, so she couldn't hold on much longer, saying he should take care of it quickly. Then a multitude of Empress clones appears, hugging the protagonist and calling him to have fun, asking if he wanted her front or back. But at the same moment, Shen uses a spell suppressing the spirits. However, one was still alive, mentioning that the boy was very strong, asking if Shen liked that game, saying that Yenner was growing fond of him. Then the spirit steps on the protagonist, saying that women prefer to be dominant, so he should stay there like a good boy. But suddenly the girl starts to feel her abdomen burning, asking what the boy was doing. Holding her foot, Shen questions if she didn't know there was a pleasure point, an acupuncture point where he could provide a very pleasurable experience. The Empress gets embarrassed, telling him to let her go. Then the protagonist starts charging an attack, mentioning that to fight her, he should leave his human desires and focus on the goals, and giving her even more pleasure. She revealed her true form. If Shen let her escape, he wouldn't know how many victims there would be. Desperate, the spirit says she was really Yenner, asking how he could be so cruel to make her suffer. However, the boy says the name Yenner could not be mentioned from her mouth. She was left behind after going through the refinement penalty to protect the sect, taking the poison from her bones for a whole month without shedding a single tear. And instead, she felt sorry for her younger sisters, hiding in a corner in the dark, blaming herself for not meeting their expectations, asking how Yenner could seduce others for her own desires, because she was just something driven by lust, stealing others' memories and ridiculing them, questioning if that made her feel superior. Then strikes the spirit, revealing its true form. Seeing Yan fallen on the ground, the spirit thinks that girl was still lost in her illusion, so she could take over her body and start over. But at the same moment, she is sliced in half. However, it wasn't the protagonist who did that. Observing where the spirit was, there was a sword in that place. Then an unknown figure appears. That was the girl the Empress had sent before. A legend says that an immortal exile to the west of the Kanyuan continent created a secret technique, where two cultivators swallowed a mysterious stone to sacrifice their spiritual fetuses to the outer world. With the blessing of the blood formation, the two could communicate freely with each other in addition to sharing their cultivation realms and experiences. The person who created this technique called it psychic interlude. Then the woman says that he still remembered Yenner. Shen mentions that her spiritual fetus was a red product seen only once every 10,000 years. Then the woman asks why Shen was retreating, because he was having fun with the spirit and had forgotten to return to the city. The protagonist feels embarrassed, asking if she had seen that situation. However, the girl says she saw everything from beginning to end. And besides that, Yenner already knew everything, asking if the protagonist was looking for medicine for Yanten, and that's why he wasn't returning to the city, leaving Shen confused, not knowing what she was talking about. Then the boy tells everything to the woman, thinking that girl had come to find him to send a message from Yenner about not looking at other women. The girl says that even if Yenner misunderstood, why would Yanten keep following him all that way? But Shen mentions that she had a hidden motive because she needed his help. Thinking about the protagonist's words, the girl thinks that he didn't recognize her as a woman. Shen says he didn't know what he should help with, but when she was being corroded by the spirit, the girl called him master, asking if Chun thought Yenner didn't meddle in other people's affairs. However, the girl remains silent, remembering her past when Yenner protected him, and that she couldn't worry about that, mentioning that now she was the supreme demon and everyone called her a killer and fighter. But Shen says that was absurd, because if that were the case, Yanten would have died many times. And besides, that girl was not a bad person. She must have suffered a lot for 100 years, and now that Shen was back, the woman was free. Even if the world ended, the protagonist would help her. Embarrassed, Chun says she understands, and now that her master is here, she shouldn't worry about those things, mentioning that when he finishes taking care of things, he should return immediately to the city. And if it happened again, she would personally cut off his legs. Then at the same moment, an aura begins to approach her head, saying that Yanner had forgiven him, and when they returned to the city, she wouldn't take her eyes off him. Shen, seeing that Yanton still hadn't woken up, says he would take a look. However, for Chun, that was not necessary, because she would personally deal with it. Then checks her heartbeat, tearing her clothes. Shen feels embarrassed seeing that situation with Chun on top of Yanner, saying that he shouldn't look when women were checking each other's heartbeats, so he would walk through the forest, thinking that since Chun was there, he didn't need to worry about the girl and could finally go to Fudd's cave. At the same moment, the woman throws a sword, saying that if he thought it was rude, he should just close his eyes. But he shouldn't leave her sight because it was an order from the Empress. Shen, observing that girl with a threatening look, questions why she was so difficult to deal with, saying he would do what she asked, asking how Yen was. And then Chun says the spirit entered her interior, corroding her spiritual fetus, stating that it would be difficult to deal with and could only use one way to fix it, but first the girl should wake up. Analyzing the situation, Shen thinks that doing that would bring damage to the physical body, questioning if that was a new technique created by later generations. Then the protagonist realizes that Chun had taken off her clothes, and when the woman looks back, the boy realizes that she reacted to it. While continuing the treatment, Shen feels embarrassed, thinking he shouldn't look at all. A while later, the day passes, where Chun had already completed the treatment, mentioning that the girl would wake up soon, so now Shen could relax. But when she looks at the protagonist, he was exhausted, saying she had done a good job. Realizing the boy was exhausted, Chun asks what had happened, but Shen gives a sarcastic smile, thinking if she still didn't know, saying that the spirit had hurt Yanton, so he would destroy their den. However, the Empress had already sent people to deal with it. Then the protagonist says she had treated him very well, offering her food, but Chun had been fasting for 3 years. Shen tries to convince her in various ways to let him go, but only managed to make her angry, saying the only thing he should do was stay there. But the boy still insisted, stating he wanted to go number 2. Then the woman throws a piece of wood to him, saying go ahead, but the protagonist says to leave it. Then Chun mentions that the girl's vitality was very damaged and the recovery method she did was only temporary, stating that elixirs would be needed to nourish her. But it was already late, so they shouldn't look now. Besides that, after all that work, she was too tired to think about it, suggesting they rest. But the protagonist says she could go rest because he would watch, and at the same moment, the woman falls to the ground. Shen apologizes because he pressed her sleep point so she could rest well. Then the protagonist leaves that place. However, the two were fully awake, cutting to Yanner combing her hair while saying that Shen was a good person because he felt sorry for the weak and helped the young. But this time felt that there was something different. So this time it was not to follow too closely, seeing if he was really helping her. Back to the present, Yan awake thinks that silver hair and animal ears were certainly the military general who worked for the Empress, stating that in that way she would definitely follow the protagonist. Then gets up trying to say something to her, but realizes something, because when she sees that her clothes were completely torn, questioning if when she was sleeping they did something to her. Realizing that the girl was already awake, Chun talks about her being enchanted by a spirit, so she shouldn't move, being surprised when she remembers everything she had done. After all of her planning, she didn't expect to be controlled by a spirit, thinking that if she was safe now, it was because Shen had helped her. As she was leaving, Chun says to stay in that place. Then Yan asks if she would find Shen, asking to go with her because she should thank him with her body for risking his life to save her, leaving the woman furious, saying she never thought Yan valued friendship so much. Yan asks what she was talking about because only a low-class person wouldn't return gratitude. Then Chun asks her to repay with her body because she was the one who saved her. The girl becomes extremely sad because all that was a fantasy of her thoughts. Then the woman draws her sword, casting a spell on Yanton, saying she was not in a position to be against the Empress, because she was just one among millions who could not compete with her. So she was to stay there because that spell would protect her. As Chun walks away, she wonders why the Empress desired the protagonist so much and no one else. Remembering her moments with the Empress, Chun begins to get emotional. But when she looks to the side, that girl was still following her, asking why she had come along and if her spell hadn't worked. However, Yemen says she had her own ways, so she shouldn't worry. Chun thinks she had underestimated her and now needed a more powerful move. Returning to the protagonist, he says he had finally arrived, before a giant place that was Fudd's cave. Meanwhile, the boy remembered his moments with his disciple. Seeing what the little girl picked up, it was a spiritual centipede that appeared only in places with a lot of spiritual energy. Luoyan asks why they needed to find a place to cultivate elixirs, because a cultivator should just sit and practice meditation. Shen says she was right, asking if she remembered why he founded his sect. And the little girl asks if it was to seek paradise, giving hope to the poor. The protagonist affirms that was it because it was the desire of his heart, but merely having supernatural powers was not enough to achieve it, because true power must be beneficial to the world, and that day, Luoyan found an ideal place to cultivate elixirs that could help people. Luoyan asks not to worry because she would turn that place into a paradise. Returning to the present, Shen mentions that it was very nostalgic, thinking that Luoyan had become a woman of respect. And besides, he remembers those two girls pretending to be asleep and probably now were following his false body, so he should thank Chun for showing his flaws. However, the protagonist thinks that was not right, but he should focus on that first, and then he would make peace with them later, saying they shouldn't reach his false body so soon. Returning to the two, Yanten was in an extremely suspicious position. Embarrassed, Chun asks what she was doing. However, the girl covers her mouth, telling her to be quiet. Chun asks if she would leave Shen alone because it was a waste for Yanten to think of him as a gentleman. Yanten says she understands how she feels because he was expressing his thanks to a tree. Then the woman thinks she couldn't report what was happening to Yanten because it would dirty her ears. Seeing the girl half naked, Chun asks her to wait. But Yanten says she was going to hell anyway, so she should let her extinguish that desire. Back to the protagonist, he wonders who is talking about him. As he looks to the side, Shen asks if that was a wind spirit, saying that wind spirits only appear in places with a lot of spiritual energy, so she had done a good job. However, when he enters the cave, a grotesque creature was watching him, leaving the poor protagonist confused because he thought there would be a paradise. At the same moment, the monster tries to attack the protagonist. Immediately, the boy changes his gaze, slicing that creature. Then he punches the ground, revealing an unknown place. So Shen asks if she had enough, observing that spirit was really ḻūyīn. Seeing Shen, she is happy, mentioning she hadn't seen him for a long time, asking if she had scared him. But the protagonist says that the monsters in the cave were just illusions and she had improved her skills. The girl affirms that Shen was the person who understood her the most. Then the protagonist asks why she was hiding from her senior sister and why she was in that form. However, ḻūyīn says that her soul hadn't left her body on its own because she had died. With a fearful look, the protagonist becomes furious, asking who had done that to her. But ḻūyīn asks him to calm down because she prepared this for herself, saying he could see with his own eyes. Mentioning that during the time he wasn't there, many people set their sights on his sect where they were again in danger of being extinguished. But Yanner and she remembered his teachings. Step by step, improving their skills, they were able to overcome this crisis completely. And after everything was over, they had to change the sect's name. But even so, in ḻūyīn's memories, Yanner says that all the plagues that interfered with the sect were examined, and now they just had to wait for Shen to return, asking why she wanted to leave. But ḻūyīn says she was being too rigid because they couldn't do as they pleased, and at that rate, they might end up growing old. However, the girl holds Yanner's hand, mentioning that everything was fine. The responsibility of taking care of the sect was not hers alone, so she shouldn't worry. Because when she is old, ḻūyīn would be the master's favorite, asking if she would like that to happen. As she leaves, the girl apologizes, mentioning that the visionary revealed that someone had planned all that, and if she found out, she would do everything to end them. So she didn't want her to look at her in that way as before, asking if her master really understood. In those turbulent times, that was the only family she had. And after that bloody battle, she escaped with the spiritual fetus, setting up a decoy and building the city of Chanshu with that. Zhang Kong waited for him to return. Then Shen says she did a good job, so she shouldn't worry because he would have a new ship sculpture with a strong base for her, using the core of his brain. ḻūyīn mentions that her master was the best, but that would be more difficult than she thought, because she was still a cultivator of the realm of life and death, leaving the protagonist surprised because she had surpassed him in cultivation level. While her body was sanctifying, everything boils down to the matter of her cultivation, saying she was just in the realm of sculptor divinity, questioning if there was an opponent that even ḻūyīn, who was in the realm of life and death, was not able to defeat. The girl says that when she looked, he was at the level of the fourth tribulations, and even after escaping with a spiritual fetus, she tried to strengthen her body but couldn't, asking if the boy had just come out of seclusion. Then Shen asks if she thought the protagonist would lose, so ḻūyīn says she knew the boy would try to face them head-on, questioning if he would win with a crushing victory. And at the same moment, she takes a drop of her saliva, leaving the boy confused, asking what that was. The girl replies that it was the reason she stayed in that place because it was a fetus made with the ingredients she gathered. Hearing what the girl said, Shen asks if she was lying, because a wonderful pill like that should be used on herself, saying she had done that with her spiritual fetus. Then the girl starts laughing, saying it was expected of her master. Shen starts to leave the room, telling her to wait there and not to worry about the break as he would return soon. But at the same moment, a hand thrusts into his chest. ḻūyīn mentions that she found an opening and finally got him, starting to cast a spell on the protagonist. Realizing it was his spiritual fetus, the protagonist asks her to take it back, but the girl asks him to say hello to Yanner for her, because the two of them were always a family to ḻūyīn, dissipating into spirit fragments. Shen says that ḻūyīn had been maintaining Fud's cave alone all that time. He would borrow her luck but never asked her to push herself so hard. Then Shen starts to leave the cave. In front of a magical tree, he apologizes, saying he would come back. The heavenly book can nurture souls, so if he kept her soul within the book, it wouldn't disperse. Remembering that ḻūyīn always liked to travel, he asks why they didn't take a walk. Returning to the two girls, they feel the protagonist's incredible aura, questioning what was happening. Then at the same moment, Shen's clone explodes. Next, Chun grips her sword, sensing a gigantic energy heading towards her. Seeing Yannon fallen on the ground, she asks what was wrong. But the girl thinks her core would only react that way when it sensed a sacred core, so that would be her best chance. Shun mentions that she didn't seem well, questioning if the previous treatment wasn't complete, leaving Yan in surprise because she was worried. Remembering her moments with her master, she thinks she couldn't give up, using a spell to bind the woman, affirming that she would go after Shen because he was a rare sanctified body not seen for over 100 years. And now she could finally replenish her master's internal Dan to extend his life. At the same moment, Chun removes the spell, asking if she didn't expect Ḻ�ᴇᴜ to defeat her. And if she behaved and let her handle Yenner's affairs, maybe she could ignore her actions. But that was out of the question because it was too much. Questioning if that was how her master had taught her, insulting her. Then Yen tells her to take back what she said, asking what her uselessness had to do with her master. Using a spell again to bind the woman. Looking at her chest, Chun realizes she had a sealing formation, not knowing when Yen had placed it. The girl says that formation could only be dispelled by rotation and only those in the realm of life and death could deactivate it. Chun asks if she had planned all that, but the girl says she never lied to him. Because she was the imperfect type who relied on those cheap tactics because without a master to teach her, she ended up having to learn on her own. Thinking if she thought she didn't want a better life and give her all to ensure a path for her master. Affirming she had done everything she could and had no choice but to resort to those methods so she would protect her master no matter what she had to do. Then a statue appears, saying that was the spirit, leaving Yan surprised, asking what he was doing in that place. The statue mentions that the cores she had offered were made with inferior ingredients from spiritual beasts, and if she paid him using her body, her heart would be saved. Saying he felt an incredible amount of ingredients in her body, so he would bring it back to him. Yen remains silent without saying a word. At the same moment, a person arrives, telling her to save her efforts. And that was the protagonist saying he was there. Our video ends here. If you liked it, leave your like. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.